It is really an honor to be with you tonight, and I thank you for the opportunity to talk about mental illness, about suicide prevention, grief recovery, and the faith community, and I've been told I can do all that in 20 minutes, so we'll see where that goes. So I am not a mental health professional. I am not a mental health. I have had no medical training. I am not a social worker. I'm not a substance abuse disorder counselor. I am a grieving mother who lost her beautiful 27-year-old son, Matthew, to suicide on April 5th, 2013. And if you can count, this is March the 15th. In just a very short time, it will be the 5th anniversary of our Matthew's death. I didn't volunteer to become an advocate for people living with mental illness and for suicide prevention. I was thrust into the work by the terrible death of my son. Shortly after Matthew died, if you've lost someone to suicide, in some ways words aren't necessary because it's the worst thing that's ever happened. My worst nightmare has already happened. The worst day of my life is behind me. Anything else is small potatoes compared to the death of my son. But in those early weeks and months when you're just alternate between numbness and desperation for comfort, for somebody to put some words around what has happened, what is meaning can there be in the death of someone that you love so dearly, that was so amazing? And believe it or not, one of the things that brought me comfort, somebody put this in my hands. It's the National Strategy for Suicide Prevention. And it's 150 pages, and I devoured it as though it were bread for my soul. And you could say, how in the world could a document of a national strategy for suicide prevention bring any comfort to your heart in the loss of your son? Well, what I can tell you is that it comforted me to know that there were good people working with all that they had to make sure that other families did not endure the torment and the torture of the loss of suicide, the loss of someone they loved. And what we are doing in Orange County is there's a collection of really good people who are working as hard as they can with all that they have, with the gifts, with the experience, with the knowledge, with the life moments that they have gone through to make sure that other families don't lose a loved one to suicide, to make sure that those living with mental illness find the access to the care that they need so that our children, our little babies, our little toddlers, little ones can have a mental illness. Matthew was mentally ill from the time he was a toddler. We just didn't know it. He was 7 when he was diagnosed with depression, but he had been depressed for years. We just didn't know it. We just thought he was different. We just thought he would outgrow it. We thought that it was a stage, a phase. It never crossed our minds that mental illness could be part of what was happening to our sweet boy. So for the children in Orange County, to the little ones, to the teenagers, to the men and the women living sometimes deaths of despair, there are good people in Orange County who are working really hard to interrupt that cycle, to bring comfort, to bring healing, to bring hope. So I'm proud to be a part of that Orange County Behavioral Health Coalition that Matt talked about. We sometimes jokingly call ourselves the Coalition of the Willing. We don't call ourselves the Coalition of the Particularly Intelligent or a coalition of the particularly brilliant or gifted, but we do call ourselves the Coalition of the Willing because each of us is willing to put our time, our energy, our money, our thoughts, our prayers in these efforts. My friend Patrick Kennedy, former congressman from Rhode Island, says there is no health without mental health. So when we talk about improving the mental health here in Orange County, we're talking about actually raising the health of every one of our citizens. There is no health if there is no mental health. Now, the faith community, as Matt mentioned, is who I represent on this coalition of the willing. I can't speak for everybody. I don't even pretend to be able to speak for everyone in the faith community, but I am one voice. And the reason that the faith community is so important to this fight, you might think, well, this is where the hospitals, this is where the professionals need to get involved, this is where the business community, this is where the insurance companies, this is where the hospital systems, this is where those who are living with mental illness, those are the people that need to try and fix the broken mental health care system that exists in our nation. And that's true. There's a part for each one, but there's also a part for the faith community. There is work that only the faith community can do. There are some things that the faith community can bring to this fight that nobody else can. And so I want to spend what little time I have here just talking to you particularly about the faith community, because I know many of you are part of this parish, you're part of another parish, you're part of another church somewhere, another you're Jewish or Muslim. You're representing all different parts of the faith community. And I want to convince you why you matter and why what you bring to this fight is invaluable and cannot be replaced by anyone else. In 2008, there was a study by the American Religious Identification Survey was conducted, and they found that 70% of American adults identified as Christians. All across our nation, about 76% of American adults identified themselves as Christians. 4% of American adults identified themselves as either Jewish, Muslim, or Buddhist. So what that says, at least according to that one survey, is that 80% of our fellow Americans in some way are connected in a faith community. And in 350,000 faith communities scattered across the United States, that means that there is some representative of the faith community, some church, some mosque, some synagogue in every corner of our nation. The faith community is everywhere. And so when we also combine the fact that the faith community, 80% of Americans identify with one major of the faith groups, one of the major faith groups, and that there are 350,000 congregations scattered across our nation. And then you hear that 25% of those who are in some kind of a mental health crisis will reach out first to their priest, to their pastor, to their rabbi, to their imam, before they will talk to a medical professional. That tells us that we have an opportunity to do something significant in this fight, to do something that is unique, something that will be effective. I've come up with an acrostic that I've been sharing for quite a while now. It's based on the word church, because sometimes people look at our church, Saddleback Church, and if you know anything about Saddleback Church, we've been here 38 years in Orange County. We're kind of a big church, and sometimes people look at our church and they think, well, of course you're doing something about mental illness. You're a big church. But so many people, in fact, the vast majority of those 350,000 faith communities are tiny. They're less than 100 people. And so what I want to share with you is what can a faith community of less than 100 people do, not just what can the big churches. This is a big church here, but what can the little churches do? This is not work that is just resolved for the big guys. So using the acrostic church, I want to tell you it doesn't require any money. Everything I'm going to say to you requires not a penny, doesn't require any staff or hiring anybody, and doesn't require any training. And so that puts it within the reach of every single faith community. So using that acrostic church, the first C stands for care for and support those living with mental illness and their families. How much money does it take to have a heart of compassion? How much money does it cost to care, to actually care for someone who is hurting or suffering with a mental illness? It doesn't cost anything. It costs absolutely nothing. It is not out of the reach. What it costs us is our own selfishness. It costs a decision of our will to say, yes, I will care. Yes, I will become a person of compassion. Yes, I will be a voice for those who are living with mental illness. You don't have to love somebody with a mental illness. You don't have to be somebody with a mental illness to have a mental illness, to care for people who have a mental illness. And it doesn't cost anything. It is simply a decision. And once we make a decision that this is going to be a congregation that cares for those that are living with mental illness, I'm going to personally be a person who cares for those who are living with a mental illness, suddenly things begin to happen. All kinds of amazing things happen when we make a decision of our will to open our hearts to become compassionate. The thing about this is that this is in the mandate of the faith community. Government is not required to have compassion for its citizens. Government is required by law to do certain things, but having a compassionate heart for us as citizens is not the mandate of our government. It's not the mandate of the medical profession. We want the medical profession to care about us, and we always love it when we find a healthcare provider who also has that great bedside manner, but there's nothing that says you have to be a caring and compassionate person to be a part of the medical community. But to be a part of the faith community, it's in our DNA. It is in our mandate. It's in our charter. It is the words of God himself that we are to be his representatives in this world. We are to care for others as he has cared for us. So the government can get by with not necessarily caring. The medical profession can get by with not necessarily having great bedside manners and tender hearts. The faith community, the church, cannot. We cannot name the name of Jesus Christ and have cold, hard hearts toward those who are suffering. So the first thing that every church can do is to care for and support those who have a mental illness. Second is to help with practical needs. Sometimes you get nothing back from your parish, from your church, from your community when you say that you have a mental illness. It takes real courage to disclose that. When I had breast cancer about 15 years ago, man, the people in my church tripped over themselves trying to prepare meals for my family. They took care of my kids. They scrubbed my toilet. They took my clothes to the dry cleaners. But if somebody in your parish, in your church, says to you, I was just diagnosed this week with bipolar disorder, how many times do you think there will be people lining up to bring them a casserole? How many times do you think there will be people that will say, listen, can I watch your kids while you go to your doctor's appointment? Can my husband and I come over and, like, I realize you're just not doing so great these days. Can we come over and, like, paint that fence for you? Offer practical help. That is within the reach of every single one of us. I have a friend, Amy Simpson, who's written a great book on mental illness, which has escaped me at the moment. I can't think of the name of her book, but she says that mental illness is the no casserole illness. We can change that. And then the U in that acrostic of church is to utilize volunteers. Every single organization is starving for volunteers. Every NGO, every philanthropic group, every volunteer organization, Red Cross, you name it, they're all dying for volunteers. Look around. This space is filled with smart, gifted, kind, loving people who, if they could find the motivation to give back, volunteers are sitting in every one of our faith communities every weekend. They're filling those pews. All we need to do is to harness their passions, their abilities, their compassion, and put them to work on behalf of those who are suffering. The R is to remove the stigma. This is probably the most powerful and the most life-changing thing that a faith community can do. When I was an advocate full-time for people living with HIV and traveled around the world, I got used to people coming up to me and whispering in my ear, I have AIDS. I'm HIV positive. They whispered in my ear because the stigma around HIV is lethal, truly. People can be killed for being positive. Women can be thrown from their homes if they're found to be HIV positive. Children can no longer play with other children. You can be fired from your job. It is a terrible thing, the stigma around HIV in our world. Thankfully, we've come a long way here in the United States. But you know what I hear now as an advocate for those living with suicidal thoughts, suicide prevention, those with mental illness? I now have people come up and whisper in my ear, I have an eating disorder. I have borderline personality disorder. I have anxiety that absolutely cripples me. Why do they whisper? Because there's still a stigma around mental illness. We don't understand that illness is illness. Illness is illness. And when one part of the body doesn't work, the whole body is not in health. And so when you remove the stigma, when you say to someone, when you, as I saw today in the Mass, I don't know how many of you were at the Mass at 5:30 today, but I was thrilled. I wanted to stand up and cheer. I figured it was probably not a good thing to do, but I really wanted to stand up and cheer when I heard the word depression mentioned, when I heard the word addiction mentioned in prayer, when I heard the prayers for those who are living with physical, mental, and spiritual maladies and illnesses. It's like, yes, right on. Yes. Dispel the stigma. Knock it down. Get rid of it. When people know that they are loved and accepted by God and by those who represent him, their lives take on a fullness. You can get through anything if you know that you are accepted and you are loved. Church should be the last place you ever have to whisper anything about your life. If there should be a safe sanctuary, if there should be a safe sanctuary on this planet, it should be the church. It should be the safest place on earth. And then C, I'll go fast, sorry. Kind of froth at the mouth a little. Is to collaborate with the community. And it's exactly what's happening right now. You and in your parish, and your faith community, and your church may or may not know much about mental illness or suicide prevention. You might really not know much about it at all. But there are people in our community, some of them are represented here tonight, who are experts, who know, who understand. They're proficient at it. They've studied. They've learned. They've learned how to apply it to people's lives and to invite them to come in and speak and train and educate. It's such a beautiful way to collaborate with the community and the faith community, with the medical community and the faith community. And then suddenly, those of us in the faith community who are not experts are educated. We're informed. We know what to look for. We don't have to be afraid when somebody says that they're feeling depressed. We don't have to go into this panic mode of, oh my gosh, what will happen if they say that they're thinking of taking their life? I wouldn't have the faintest idea what to do. Because suddenly we've been trained. We've heard it. Somebody who knows more than we do has educated us. Collaborate with the community. And then the last H in that acrostic is to offer hope. Because nobody can offer hope like the faith community. Nobody can. I've already said that the government and the medical community and the business community are not necessarily tasked with showing compassion or giving hope, but we are. We are. It's job number one for us to offer hope to people. We offer hope, and what I think what I love so much is we don't even just offer hope for the life to come. Sometimes we've gotten really caught up in the life to come, which, believe me, if heaven wasn't real, I would be a desperate woman today, because if I didn't, okay, I'm just going to tell you, the resurrection of Jesus Christ changed everything. And because Jesus is alive, my son Matthew is alive, and because they're both alive, I will be alive too one day. Okay, so, but I have not only hope. I realize not everybody's coming from the same place, so I want to just be careful and respectful of that. But how can I not say that Jesus is alive? Okay, so where I was going with that is there's not only hope for the future, there's hope for right now. The faith community can be the group that says, listen, you may have burned the bridges in your family because those living with mental illness, particularly severe mental illness, or chronic suicidality, or suicidal thoughts, or substance use disorder, believe me, they burn a lot of bridges. A lot of relationships get broken and destroyed along the way. But the faith community needs to be a place where there are brothers and sisters who say, whether you are ever healed, whether you are cured, whether you're in recovery, whether you get this all together or not, whether anything ever changes in your life, there's a group of people here who will not walk away from you. We will not walk away from you. We will walk with you. No matter what happens, no matter what doesn't happen. You are safe here, and there is hope, because we will be with you. One of the most powerful examples, and I'll close with this, for me, that I've come to see in the last year, maybe it's everybody else is familiar with it, and I'm the last one to know, and I know you can't see it from this tiny little space, but I'll show it to you if you want to look at it. It's Japanese pottery, and it's called kintsugi. And this pottery is typically if you break a mug, from your dishes, you break something, what do? We typically just throw it away. It's broken, it's in pieces, it's no longer beautiful, it's no longer functional. But in kintsugi art, a broken vase, a broken glass, a broken bowl is put back together very carefully, tenderly, and beautifully with a combination of gold and epoxy, because the belief is that you can be broken and beautiful at the same time. And those of us, I live with depression. My husband has had panic attacks for a very long time. My 3 children all lived with anxiety. 2 are still alive, and anxiety and depression. And my 1 son had serious mental illness. And I have witnessed in my life with myself, my husband, and my children. That you can be broken and beautiful. And that the faith community offers that hope. It's our job, it's our mandate, it's our privilege to walk alongside people in their brokenness and say, you are loved, you matter, your story matters. And yes, you may be a little cracked, but you are beautiful. Thank you.